All right, we are back with another installment of Accepting the Challenges. And, if this is your first time watching or listening, Accepting the Challenges is a platform that is designed to give educators around the world some spotlight, some shine, allow them to talk about their journey, allow them to talk about their failures and successes throughout this education ecosystem, share some tidbits for other educators out there, and overall share to the world, hey, I'm real, we're real people, we're amazing people. And if you've listened to any of these, you know that I actually believe that educators are superheroes. They are the ones who make that initial impact, and probably the most powerful impact, even in some situations more than parents, as those young people become adults and become whoever they are going to be, either positively or negatively, into society. And today's guest is one that I'm really, really excited to have on for multiple different reasons. And we just had a chat off air, and I actually learned some other stuff that I did not know where we're aligned. So I think this conversation is going to be really, really good. So I would like to thankfully welcome Richard Ramos to the podcast. Richard, if you will, share a little bit about who you are and what you currently do, and then we'll kind of dive into a little bit of your history and past.
Okay. So, as Shane mentioned, my name is Richard Ramos. I'm a school principal in the city of Los Angeles, Los Angeles Unified School District. We're the second largest in the country. I've been with the district for 23 years now, and I literally stumbled onto education. It wasn't like my parents were educators. It wasn't that I was saying, hey, this is my dream of being an educator, but I love what I do. Every day I wake up, I know I'm making an impact. I'm having an impact. Our business is all relational. If you can relate with our kids, then you can develop a relationship with them. They'll go up that hill with you, steadfast and earnest, and want to make something of themselves. When we can nurture and sort of become like a mentor to them during this process. So we're more than teachers. We're more than principals. We literally are life coaches for many of our students. So I appreciate Shane inviting me to this morning for this interview.
Absolutely. So, give me a little bit of breakdown on the demographics of your school, kind of the makeup, what you've got, how that lays out.
Yeah, so we have about 800 students. We have 22 different languages spoken here.
Wow.
However, we do have 94% of our population happens to be Latino, but that other 6% speaks an additional 20 different languages. So it's diverse in that sense. We're right in the middle of the San Fernando Valley, near this university called Cal State University Northridge. So we have a magnet school here that brings kids as far as 18, 20 miles into our school for our medical health magnet. And these kids, some of these kids, honestly, to get to school at 7:30, that's what time we open, have to hop on a bus at 6 o'clock in the morning to trek across the city of Los Angeles. And if you've ever been in Los Angeles traffic, you understand why.
Yes.
You have to leave that early. It's insane. But they do it, and they do it to change their lives, really. And I think they realize that at such a young age, and I admire that about our youth.
Yeah. So I think that's and you're not talking about a school bus. You're talking about like a city transportation, public transportation.
No, for the magnet, it is a school.
Okay,
It's a
it is.
bus. Yeah, they just travel from school to school.
Okay.
The magnet program, they pick up students around the city and take them to different school sites that their parents have chosen, or the students have helped parents choose for them across the city of Los Angeles. And we're huge. It's 702 square miles. That's what our district is.
Now you're in middle school there. Is it sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, or is it just seventh and eighth?
No, it's sixth, seventh, and eighth.
Sixth, seventh, and eighth. Okay, yeah, no, that is that's a good sized school, and that's while I'm sure a common, so for our listeners, maybe you're not, maybe you're from another country outside of the United States and you're not 100% familiar with the demographics in Los Angeles and those different things. That's not necessarily the demographics and the makeup of the ethnicity isn't uncommon to Los Angeles, but it is uncommon to the United States as a whole to have that much, to be the for the minority in our country to be the majority in a school. For instance, in Kentucky, that you wouldn't find that you wouldn't
Yeah.
find that type of makeup. But I find it fascinating. So you mentioned the different languages that are spoken. Do you guys embrace that within the school and try to harness that and celebrate some of that?
Yeah, we do. We just painted a mural. We did a Google form and asked kids, how do you say welcome? Because
Yeah,
we want to have our families come here for the first time. We want to welcome them in their primary language. So we got 22 different ways of saying welcome. That's now painted in a mural in the front of our school. As soon as you walk into the main office, you're being welcomed in your native language, and we do celebrate it. We celebrate it because it's important for kids to know that they have a space in the world that sometimes seems kind of isolated to them.
yeah.
So we're pushing. This is my third year, my fourth year at this particular school, and we're pushing for an inclusion, the diversity, and the acknowledgement of that diversity.
Absolutely. So give me a bit of a breakdown then of the teachers. Does your teacher demographic match your student demographic, or is it like the atypical American school where it's a majority of white females in a certain age range?
Yeah, so the across Alley Unified, that's what it is. I've yet to work at a school in my 23-year career that is that's diverse as the student population,
Sure.
and that's just a common thing. Even when I was a student, it was the same thing because I attended schools here in Los Angeles Unified School District as a kid. My children attended through the same schools that I went to as a kid, so that has changed. My particular school, it's majority female, majority white. We have in the last couple of years brought in some diverse teachers to kind of also balance that narrative
Yeah.
in our school. And but for the most part, every single one of our teachers works their heart out. And
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'll tell you this is that like everybody went to college, obviously, when you
Sure.
work in the school environment, right? So teachers that I found that make a difference are operating from here, from the heart. So if you think about Kobe, I mean we're the Lakers here in the city of Los Angeles.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When he would shoot that 3-pointer, he wouldn't run across the court tapping his head, and it is an intellectual game as well. He was
Sure.
tapping his heart because the game was a game of the heart. And education is very much a game of here. Yeah, we have to have some senses and some intellect, but this is what taps kids right here, the heart of what we do every day. And as you mentioned, educators are superheroes. We have them
Absolutely.
here 6, 7, 8 hours if they're staying in our after school program, and we are kind of like an ad hoc family member to them for that period that they're in middle school, which is 3 years. So I acknowledge the hard work of our staff, of our teachers across the country, especially in this pandemic, Shane, because we've had to build a system that didn't exist. We went from brick and mortar March 13th to functioning online within weeks. And I tell you, that's amazing, even from an engineering standpoint,
Yes.
that we were able to assemble that so quickly. And yeah, there were bumps in the road, and everything wasn't as smooth as we wanted it to be. But we literally put the brakes on and hit a U-turn and went into the cyber world.
Well, yeah, absolutely. You're an educator who's been doing this, 20 plus years, and you've literally learned one way every day, for 20 years, and now they walk in and, oh, by the way, this whole thing's happening, and you got about 2 weeks to figure out how to do your job now online, completely online. Like you can't, like it's I say this: educators, they bend, they don't break, right? Like you guys,
Yeah.
you, but when you really step back, and I'm sure this is something that, especially in California, you guys deal with some different natural disasters, earthquakes, wildfires, these different
Yeah.
things. So for you guys, there's always something potentially coming up that could cause things to be a little bit off kilter a little bit. And I would say, like, educators, this is what you do, and this is why I love it, because as educators, you're always changing. Something happens and the state decides, well, we're going to do this new standardized test, and now all of a sudden you got to change everything that you've been doing. Now you've got to do this, right? So there's all of these things, even down to the little day-to-days of, well, you were supposed to get a lunch break and a planning period today. Well, these things happened and this teacher's out, so for this week, unfortunately, you're just going to have to eat in between class, and you're going to have to figure it out. I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you however I can, but this is what it is. And that's the life of a teacher, right? That is it. So yeah, when I saw, and it's funny. So we talk about, and I don't really get into politics a lot, but I tell people jokingly, if our current president, if our freedom depended on him being able to set up an email address, we would be in trouble, right? And I say that because we've got to figure out how to get more people that are more, like, I'll be honest, I'd love to see a former teacher become president, because it's like, hey, like, you get it, like, you're dealing with real America, right? You're
Yeah.
dealing with the real world, and
Every day. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
Shane, you mentioned about adapting, and one of my science teachers, we were talking about like this, building this aircraft as it's flying and putting in the seats and the windows. And she says, look, it matches science, like we as a human species, we've been adapting for thousands and thousands of years for our own
absolutely.
survival. And we've adapted to this. She's telling me, Mr. Ramos, we've adapted because the human species will continue to adapt to its times. And I just sat back and I was like, that's the teacher talking right there. She put it into context, what happens in those books that we read that are sometimes so far and so 2D, and putting it into context. I was like, that's just a great way of explaining what's going on right now in this pandemic phase. And she's a trooper. Every day she comes in, she has these amazing lessons or simulations, and they're online. It's really great, and we need to applaud them.
Absolutely.
We don't applaud them. We would probably not even think, oh, a teacher becoming the United States president. We would probably have some aversion to it, because we would say, oh, we need a business person in there.
Sure.
But we deal with human beings every day, with our legacies every day. And I think we understand people just as much as a psychologist and a psychiatrist
You
would.
play that sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, whether it's your role, you're playing it not only for the students but also for the teachers who are dealing with the trauma of dealing with the trauma of the kids.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with it, and you mentioned something about putting an aircraft together while it's flying. So in the startup world, where I originally started my professional career, I guess you will say, we talk about that very same thing. It's like jumping out of an airplane with all the materials of a parachute, and you got to figure out and sew it all together and get it all figured out before you hit, right? Or driving the car down the road and you're putting it together. All you've got is a body and an engine, and you're trying to put the brakes together and the engine together all while you're going downhill. So when you said that, I relate massively with that. So Richard, let me ask you this. I want to dive a little bit back into your past and kind of your journey, and kind of where your story started and kind of how you became. Because here, I mean, in a quick observation, we've only been talking here for a few minutes, and I've read your bio on the website and done a Google search like we all do and play private eye detective when we're meeting somebody or looking into somebody. And you are clearly a person who lives their life of what I call servant leadership. You are serving others. That is clear. You have an altruistic drive of what you're doing, and you want to serve other people. So take me back to, we won't age you, but take me back to young Richard in Los Angeles, and then kind of through life a little bit and how you got into education.
Okay. I mean, that's really it's been a journey, and it's been an up-road journey for myself. And I have three other brothers, right? So, I'll start off with my parents, and my gratitude is to them. My father's still alive. He's 86 years old. My dad, if it wasn't for his sternness, I don't think I would be in this position right now, to be honest. And I'll say it, and I've told him this, is that I hated him as a kid. But I today, as an adult, I thank him. And I was just at his home just the other day, and I was telling him, thank you, Dad. Thank you for what you did. And you're one of the reasons that I'm here. And I get choked up over it because it's been a journey, Shane. My mom, she's not with us any longer. She went to sixth grade. My dad went to third grade. So that's why I say I don't come from an education family. They migrated north to come here to make a better life. And I say migrated is because it reminds me, like, they're birds, they're birds, and they're going somewhere to feed and nourish their young, right? So they came over. We lived.
Where did they originate from? So where is your family originally from?
So my mom's from Mexico City. It's like the interior of Mexico. Yep. My dad is from a neighboring state, Guadalajara. But they met in Tijuana, Mexico, which is the border city of California. They met there and had my first brother, Carlos, and then they migrated over to San Fernando. And as a young kid, they didn't have anything. So we lived in a garage conversion, and talk about being teased, like, as a kid. I would hate to walk home with my peers because, like, I wasn't going into the house. I was going into that backyard garage for a family of six. And it was kids can be downright mean.
Absolutely.
And downright just sobering to make you realize, like, damn, you don't have very much. So that, I think, helped me build kind of my resilience and my brother's resilience. But go down the road a little bit, I wasn't the best student, whereas my brother George was the model student. He's just a couple of years older than me, so we were kind of like parallel tracks in school, stuff like that. And George was the model A student. And to put it into context, my brother at 17 went off to Stanford University to become an electrical engineer. That's my brother. And he's always been very successful. Whereas I didn't do well in school. In middle school, that's where I lost myself. That's how I ended up in middle school. I wanted to purposely become a principal and a teacher at a middle school because I know we get lost there.
Yeah.
I got lost at my home school in the city of San Fernando. I joined a local gang. Yeah, and I share this story with my kids.
No,
and
this is great. This
is
like,
great. They'll look at me like, what? And I went through the juvenile justice system as a young kid, through middle school and high school. I didn't graduate on stage. That's what you call it. You really don't graduate from middle school. Like the diploma. Ask you what's your middle school diploma, but I was kicked out 2 weeks into the end of the school year, and I didn't go back to middle school. And interestingly enough, is that my brother Oscar and I were thinking about this the other day. I got kicked out of school, and in 1982, there was this festival in Los Angeles called the US Festival, where like Ozzy Osbourne and these great artists were.
Yeah.
My parents sent me off on a concert with my older brother Oscar, and instead of giving me a consequence for being kicked out, and they were busy working, like honestly, they were just, not that they weren't there for us.
Yeah.
They were in survival mode.
Yes.
And I go on to a concert for 4 days, and I got to see Ozzy, Bon Jovi, you name it, all the
Yeah.
great artists of that generation. But I made it. I made it through that resilience that I believe that I learned early on as a kid. And I think my turning point was I was in the juvenile correction facility in Silmar, California, and there I am sitting, and my brother George is about to graduate from Stanford University, and I'm like looking out these small windows, and they do them purposely, I think, to psychologically just injure you, right? I'm looking out through this window, and I'm like trying to peek just to see if I see other people, and I literally broke down into tears, and I'm like, look at what my life has evolved into, and I'm responsible for it. I'm responsible. There was people that tried to help me along the way. I didn't want it. I didn't want it at the time. There was my, talk about heroes, Mr. Schaefer, my history teacher at Silmar High School, would assemble his packets of the history material and U.S. government stuff and send it over to juvenile hall, and with messages saying, go ahead and complete it. I'm going to still be giving you credit for this.
That's awesome.
That's awesome, right? He didn't have to do that.
No, not at all.
Wash my hands. The kid's not in my class. But that wasn't Mr. Schaefer. That's what I mean. When you operate from here, that's when you're going to make the biggest difference and the impression. And I still remember him. Never got to say thank you to him for some reason or another. But here I am, as a 23-year veteran of the district, and I'm hoping to change kids' lives just the way that my life has been changed through education. Yeah, I'll say this one thing. When I started here, it was interesting. I wasn't dressed like this with a coat and stuff. Yeah. So I'm sitting outside the office looking around, and this gentleman comes up.
I think I know where this is going.
Yeah, it was surreal. And he asked me if I'm the custodian of the building. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. Here's my card. I'm the new school principal. And this guy was like, he just shrunk there because he worked for the district. And here he was thinking that I was a custodian. And honestly, Shane, that's where my life could have ended up at. Yeah. That's where I could have ended up doing something that probably I wouldn't have been as content doing as I am today as an educator and a school principal, and literally trying to change lives every day and giving some hope to kids that may have lost that hope, just like me. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's, man, wow. That's, man, I did not know those things that you just shared about your journey, and I can relate in so many different ways. I didn't end up in juvenile detention, but definitely have had my fair share of trouble. I've had a gun pulled on me 3 times in my life. I've got many friends that are, have been in and out of the penitentiary, and these different things. So I understand it, can relate to what it is. And I really want to dive into some of it, because I think there is some value there for other educators that are listening. One, I applaud you on your journey, because I guess as someone who also, while my circumstances, from a living standpoint, were not what yours were when you came here. I very much come from a small town white family, where even though we had it poor, and even though we didn't have a lot of things, we still, just by nature of American society, had it better, I'm sure, no doubt, than what you had. But I can relate and I can understand, because I know what the journey takes for you to get to where you're at right now and to be successful. And resilience is a word that you used, and that is beyond what that is. There's not a word for people who overcome those things. I don't think. I truly believe that because, like you said, middle schoolers, they're brutal, and you're dealing with that, and middle schoolers will to other middle schoolers. Now I have the benefit. I'm a big guy, so I'm 6'6". I got a big voice. I'm an intimidating guy. So when I come around middle schoolers, I don't have that issue. I assert my dominance of the jungle when I come around. But when you're a middle school kid, I mean, I dealt with it. I can remember little things and being picked on. Or I played basketball, but I wasn't any good. I was one of the tallest kids in school. My dad happened to work for the school system, so it was, oh, the only reason you're on the team is because your dad and these different things. And I actually quit my 8th grade year, and then ended up starting varsity the very first game of the season my freshman year, and then kind of going on. But that resilience caused me. You and I have something similar, I think, in us that says, uh, and I don't know you on a personal level. I hope I get to know you on a personal level, because who you are is definitely somebody I like to keep around. Um, is it safe to say you're one of those people where when someone tells you no, or someone tells you you can't, or you're not supposed to, you have this inner fire? And I'll keep it PG-13, but kind of like, screw you. I'm going to just hide and watch. Just hide and watch, and just pay attention. Get a front row seat, because you've now given me some motivation to go do this.
I, that's so true. That when somebody tells me no, that it can't be done, or that we can't do it, or just kind of shrugs it off, it does ignite this inner fire. Like, oh well, okay, well, let me show you. And I'm 51 years old. I still use that today as motivation. Is
Awesome.
And I tell kids that, that revenge is the greatest sort of, like, like, redemption part of it. Because if people tell you you can't do it, and you show them that you can, that feeling is definitely, you can taste it. And kids will say, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, Mr. Ramos. And because I'll pull them into the office here, and like, what's going on? Like, and I'll talk to them like, dude, what's going on, man? Like, tell me what's going on. Obviously it's something, because the way you're acting just ain't right. And I know your parents just don't agree with it. And then they'll share some stuff. And I'm like, well, show them that you can. Show them.
Absolutely.
If you give up, you feed in to that narrative they created of you. I said, control your narrative, control your story of what you want to be. And I think all of us possess the pen to write our own narrative. I truly
100%.
believe that. Yeah,
100%.
I believe it. Yeah.
So I want to ask, because I think this is important for educators out there that maybe deal with or work with students who are minority, or people of color, and I'm curious. You mentioned your parents, and you mentioned their education and lack thereof in their journey. Um, did How did that motivate you? Not necessarily from their perspective, but how aware were you of the the prejudices, and the different, I guess, I mean, there's racism with it as well, and these different things. How aware were you of other adults or the environment looking at your parents from a negative aspect? And what did you learn? Because and the reason I ask is because you come off like you've been very self-aware at an early age, and I can attest, when you go through trauma and you deal with things at a young age, it's a survival tactic. You grew up in neighborhoods where you had gangs, and that is a survival tactic. You have to be able to self-aware to what that world calls read the room, right? You have to know, you have to maneuver amongst the wolves and the sharks of the world. And so I guess what I'm asking is how aware were you of those things? What
Yeah.
did they teach you, and then because I think it's important for people who are dealing with the young Richard right now to understand a little bit about what he's aware of the world and how that affects.
That's a great question. You know, we come in. You're right. You know, we come in with assets when we come from that world.
Oh, 100%.
And yeah, and sometimes it's seen as a deficit, right? So I'll give you an example. So my mom.
Well, society tells us that. Society tells us you because you come from this, you have less of an advantage. I actually believe you have more of an advantage.
Yeah. So look, my mom would come in. My dad never showed up at school, not once. Okay. And I will add this. Look, my dad was the hardest, most honorable working person that I've ever met. And I mean that. And I've met hundreds of families and parents. My dad would sometimes work 3 jobs. He bought his own home. The home he lives in right now, he's still there. But right now he gets Social Security, and it's very minimal. I'll say what it is. It's $952. Okay. So when I hear teachers say you're not working hard enough, I disagree with it, because my father worked really, really hard. And if that's the measure of success, my dad shouldn't be in the conditions he is right now. It doesn't add up to just say working hard is enough, in other words.
Sure.
Right? There has to be opportunity, chance, etc. Right? So he never was at school with us. He was waiting for me at home if I got in trouble with the bout, and that's the way he fixed things. Okay. Whereas my mom, she would come into meetings, and at that time there wasn't anybody that spoke Spanish, so my mom would sit there and just smile, because like I don't know, and I would leave there, and my brother George says, "Don't smile. Smiling is like, in here, this country, is like you're acknowledging, you're agreeing with it, right?"
Yeah.
And my mom just didn't know how to respond in that conference and in that meeting at the time. But I was aware of it, because the time that they gave my mom wasn't enough. They weren't even asking the questions. And like my name is,
you could obviously understand. So you understood what was going on and what was being said and asked.
Yeah. And I was like, this is not cool. Like, the principal is not even being nice to my mom. And I would sit there and it'd eat me up. But I'll give you an example. My name is Ricardo. That's the Spanish version of Richard.
Yep.
I went into kinder, and I remember my teacher, she would not be able to pronounce my name. And then she just started calling me Richard. And she was Richard. And I wouldn't respond, right? Because that I wasn't accustomed to that.
Yeah.
And coming into this and knowing kind of where I grew up, I would say my name is not Richard, it's Ricardo. And they won. My name was changed in the school system because they didn't want to try to make the pronunciation of Ricardo. And those things bothered me. Where my brother George, his name is Jorge.
Yeah.
And George was okay with it. George, in the sense of like assimilating and stuff, he just was like, "Oh, cool, whatever, man. Like, they call me George." Like, there was nothing, there was no fight in him to say, "Hey, this is not cool."
Yeah.
And at a very young age, I was like, that I didn't feel comfortable with it, and that's where that's like where my rage came in and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, this is not acceptable. But I'll tell you, we come with a bunch of assets into the school, because you mentioned it. We're amongst sharks, and so we're always having to navigate the system of being eaten. So we come already with some assets that we need to acknowledge as educators, and realize, oh wow, these kids come with some skills that kids in the affluent areas haven't developed. And if we can nurture those assets, we're going to be better off. But we have to be able to understand that kid.
Absolutely.
That kid, the me kid, the you kid, Shane, and understand how to help navigate their emotions and their feelings. And we're doing a lot of that in our district. It's called the social emotional lens. It's trying to figure out who they are, find the asset, and nurture the asset. I think we as a country are going to be much better because our generation functioned in a different lens. These kids are no longer functioning in that lens. And
Correct.
we, the older folks in these schools, have to realize that our lens is not going to work with this new generation of kids. We have to adapt, like my science teacher said, we have to adapt for survival and for the survival of our country, the survival of our community, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and it should be what is not as commonplace. For example, you and I become friends, and I come to Los Angeles and come to your house for dinner, or you come to Kentucky and want to take a tour, and your family comes. That's not as normal as it will be for our kids and the generations coming after, because they've just got so when you talk about leading from the heart. What I formulate that as and how I talk about it is actually leading with being authentic, right? Kids, so this coming from the environments and neighborhoods, just like you learned very, very quickly when an adult was being authentic with you and your family, or when they were just pandering or even being disrespectful. So you emotionally matured from the trauma and from dealing with those things to be able to see that. And I think a lot of times and that's why I asked about the demographic of your school, because I can only imagine hearing your story. Like I wish you could create a boot camp for, and this probably sounds a bit lightning rodish, I guess, but white female young teachers that come in that are going to be dealing with the demographic of the world that they're going to be dealing with, because I can only imagine the jewels that you're sharing with them in real world experiences of, hey, wait a second, I was this kid, and let me explain to you so you understand, like, this is why he's saying this to you. This is why his parents are here or are not here. This is why those things, because that is what we have to have. And it is what's amazing to me, and I find, I can understand your story, is if as a white guy you pronounce my name wrong, I get pissed and I take it as offensive as you don't respect me enough to learn my name. Whereas in your world and came up, it was just because it's difficult and I don't understand, or I don't know how to enunciate this, or whatever, then I'm just going to change it. The thought that actually even happened, and probably millions of times across millions of kids, is crazy. That's crazy. And kids nowadays operate way more on what I call a gauge of authenticity. They are fully aware. They have way more information than any other generation ever. They have access to our learning and understanding. You have to kind of go with the flow of what it is. You're not going to get anything past these kids. You're not. I'll use you for an example. The environment you grew up in as a young kid, and the gang environment, and that, what I call the underworld of society, you had to figure out really quick who was really about what they're saying and who wasn't, so you knew how to move and maneuver around different people. And kids are dealing with that. So I dealt with a lot of trauma and different types of abuse as a kid from my parents. So one of the things I was always told is, Shane, you're not going to be anything but a drug dealer, a drug addict, or a garbage man. Well, none of those three things any kid wants to aspire to be, right? But I learned really quick, like, wait a second, like, you don't know me. I'm your child, and you don't even know who I am. You know nothing about me. So sure, it got me in some trouble, and I kind of maneuvered through life. But that level of authenticity for these kids is huge. What are some of the things now? So I guess let me ask you this, and I'm assuming, because I guess I'm maybe assuming wrong, but a lot of the teachers, they don't necessarily live in the neighborhoods where these kids grow up.
No, they don't. No.
So what are some of the things? Because I think you have a unique aspect, and I think there's some tips that you can probably share. What are some of the things that you do to prepare your teachers to deal with the kids and to embrace the kids that are going to show up, at school every day?
Yeah, yeah, I have one-to-one conversations with them. I won't do it in public. I want to be respectful of our folks on campus. But if an issue comes up, I've shared my story just like I've shared right now. Uh, and as I mentioned, we control our narrative, and I purposely share my narrative because I don't want other people that grew up with me to tell it in a way that definitely is not
Yep.
productive to my life and
Yep.
my children and my grandchildren and stuff. But I've shared here my first day of school. I shared, hey, this is who I am. This is how I grew up. Wasn't the best of students, but here I am leading a school now. So I'll share with them. There was an incident that happened recently. Well, when we were still on campus,
Mm-hmm.
one of our kids got up and said something, and the teacher said something back. And what we have to understand is that, and I'm married to a psychologist, okay? So she's taught me all this, and I've used this now into like sharing this,
Sure.
is that we have this stuff, the executive functioning, the front of our brain, right? And it doesn't mature for males specifically until your 20s. So we're always making all these confused decisions because our executive functioning skills are not developed. And that's not an excuse for us to behave that way. I'm not saying that.
Correct.
But it's the science of what we know. But as an adult, our executive functioning skills are intact. And the moment that that person stood up and kind of like went at the kid, that's when everything blew up. And we have to be able to mitigate that inner feeling of that fight or flight mode. And instead of I'm not saying to flight, I'm not saying to run from them, but I'm not saying to fight with them either. And those are the conversations that I have, is that you do that, the kid is going to stand up. And this little piece of, I guess, of knowledge for educators is that when you're poor, you have something of value. And that one thing of value is the respect that you've developed from kinder to middle school or even high school. That's the only thing of possession. Like I have suits, I have cars now, I have many things of value now. But as a kid growing up, my respect, I had earned it. And if you said something to me, I had to stand up because that's that shark in that environment. And I had to protect my respect, right? Because if you lose that in a community that you're growing up in, it's hard to get it back. So the kid who stands up is standing up for something they value. That's the respect that they have amongst their peers. And there's a lot of peer pressure in middle school. So once you attack that, they're going to go into attack mode on you. And you're never going to be able to recover moving forward with that kid in that classroom, because they're going to feel that they've lost something with you. And they're always going to be on attack mode with you. And I did it with teachers in my class that once they targeted me, I targeted them back. And if I got sent back to their classroom, and in high school specifically, I was giving them a hard time because I felt that they had disrespected me. And that may not make sense for people.
No, yeah, no, I get it. So what I want you to share with a little bit, because I think this matters. First of all, you are 100% spot on, and you've laid it out in a way that I don't think like anybody who has it. So I think a lot of times, so you've grown up in LA, outside of LA. And I keep going back to this, not to glorify it, but to give some context, because so here in where I live, where my wife teaches, last year she came to me. She knows my past and knows where I come from, and I can walk on the west end of Detroit, or I can go to Opelika, Florida, and walk around, be the only white guy, and be totally comfortable.
Yeah.
And so she came to me and she was like, hey, she was like, so we do you know anything about this gang or this gang? Because like we've got some kids in there, coming and they're talking about. So I start laughing first. I'm like, well, first of all, these aren't gangs here. Like these are a group of kids that are, calling themselves something or whatever. But when we're talking about that respect, right? A lot of people don't understand that that is a huge part of why young people join gangs is because of the level of respect that it carries and what those things like how that goes with life and how that goes with like this is who I am. It gives you an identity and
Yeah.
it gives you a level of respect in there. And I don't think a lot of people necessarily understand that.
Yeah. There's value to it, right? So the notion that we can, kind of get up and kind of like act like we're gonna, as an adult, act like
Sure.
we're like front on
Puff
them.
your chest. Yeah. Puff your chest
Yeah,
out a little bit. Yeah.
that's gonna cause problems. And I know we want to assert our position as adult and child, but that's not the way to do it. My suggestion is ignore the behavior as hard as it may be, but also work on developing a relationship with them. So I'm going to take you back 6 years. 6 years ago, I was still a teacher.
Yep.
I would pull my kids out of the class, and I had this one kid, Giovanni. I'm still in touch with him. On his neck, he had an SF tattoo, which is the neighborhood of that school. Okay, so he was a bona fide gang member.
Yeah.
And when something happened, he sat on the table, and I was like, "Hey, Gio, you can't be sitting on the table like that." And just I talked to him just like normal, right? Gio, you can't do that. And he kept on sitting there, so I ignored it. And then when the bell rang, he's walking out. I said, "Hey, Gio, can you have a minute?" And he tells me like, "What? Like what? Like I'm bothering him, right?" I say, "Hey, bro, what's going on?" Like, and I don't know, maybe I can get away with that, but I was like, "Hey, bro, what's going on? Never been disrespectful like that." And then he breaks down. He says, "Man, my old lady, my girlfriend, having some, and he lets out all this stuff that's going on in his life. And we need to know that. Those are data points for us.
Well,
And
I
those
think, yeah,
data points are going to help us."
yeah, you say you can get away with it, but it's because you're being authentic. I believe anybody can relate to these kids in that way, but you have to develop your own sense of authenticity to be able to say, hey, I'm because you're not, like you said, it's all about tone matters. How you say things matter. And you just mentioned something really important for these kids in these troubled environments. That's the flip side of, so there's positives to it. The negatives to it are there's still these stigmas of you can't show emotion, you can't show your pain, you can't show that you're a human, you can't show that you cry. Like those things are still, negatively stigmatized to be able to go. So, for him to be able to do that, he felt safe in that moment to be able, because if in the environment that he comes from, if they find out that he's crying at school and he's sharing all these things, he loses the most valuable thing that he has as that respect in where he lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And interesting that particular kid, he got sent to my class as a kind of like a last minute addition.
Yeah.
And that relational part to all educators matters. I'll tell you, I was walking through the quad at that particular school, and the dean is there, and that kid Gio and some of his friends were helping me carry stuff across campus because I was changing rooms. And the dean is like, "How the heck do you get them to do that?" And I got them to do it because I was cool with them. I cared about them, and they knew I cared about them. And when something happened to them, they would come to me almost like a counselor, and I would go to bat for them. I would go and talk to the principal or to the AP and say, "Hey, this is the information I'm getting. Like, is there any way we can help them?"
Yeah.
They're not a menace to the school.
Yeah.
These kids just need that extra scoop of love and
Absolutely.
support. So those
Man,
things
I
always
love
work.
it.
But you're right, though. You have to find your way of doing it. I couldn't write a book and say, hey, follow this, because you have to be able to define who you are. I went to a talk with Lin-Manuel, the guy who wrote the play, very famous play. Oh my God! It's about the United States coming together. I forgot the name of it. It's a great play. It was on Broadway and it's been on TV now. And he shared Lin-Manuel.
In the Heights, Hamilton.
Hamilton.
Yeah.
So he came and spoke to kids in LA Unified, and I'm in the audience. I had taken a group of my students there from this school, and they asked him, how did you get to where you're at? And he says, hey, all my life, I didn't know who I was. And the more people I met, I would take a piece of them. And the way he described it, I mean, it was vivid. The guy's a storyteller, right? He said, I take a piece of them and I made it part of me. And at one point, I became me. And that's who I am today. And that's so true. You have to audit kids have to, and I tell them, you have to audit your circle. If you're hanging around with a bunch of knuckleheads, you're going to be a knucklehead. There's no way around it. So if you audit your circle and you bring in a couple of kids who are cool, but then you got kids who are also studying, you're going to take little pieces of them like Lin-Manuel did and become yourself. And when he shared that, I also looked at my own life and I was like, yeah, I took some pieces of my mom and my dad and so and so and so and so, and I become me, and that's who I am. It's myself, and those are little things I believe we need to help dialogue in class. Besides hey, you got to learn math, standard 7 functions, right? There has to be that other component, which many teachers do, that are the life components.
So right? I call that being a chameleon. And when you can navigate the waters and the different groups of people and carry the same level of respect and attention of all different people, it is. So that is a byproduct of coming from the type of environment that you and I come from. You had to learn it, right? You had to learn it a different way. You had to learn English quick as a young kid so that you could help your parents, so that you could help and make sure when you went somewhere, because you saw, wait a second, I'm treated differently if I speak Spanish, if they hear me speak Spanish, than if I speak English. So I'm now a chameleon, right? So now that's what you just laid out. And I love it because I talk about this a lot, to where you can be a chameleon and sit down and talk to that kid who's dealing with what he's dealing with in that neighborhood. And then you can walk in the next room full of a bunch of white teachers. And now I can sit down and I can relate to you, and, I can speak, and I know how, so it's that communication and that ability to understand. And it goes back to the authenticity. If it comes back, if you're just trying to play me and say something to me, it's not going to work. But if you're being real with me, it works. And I love it. I love it. Go ahead.
If I could add something else too, the story has been pretty amazing for me. I'm blessed, honestly. I believe truly I'm blessed. I sent this in an email to you. I became a teacher at 27. Wasn't what I wanted to do. Just somebody invited me in to an interview. I was in college at the time, and I got hired. 2 years later, I'm a teacher, and I get tapped on the shoulder by the local assembly person for the 39th district, and he was at the state of California as an assembly person. He says, "Oh, you guys should run for the San Fernando City Council," the city I grew up in. And so I've had the opportunity to share this one and go around, and it's like from this lawbreaker to a lawmaker. So I decide to run. I'm 29 years old. I'm sitting at this restaurant called El Abuelo right next to Morningside, my school. I had left for lunch to go meet with the police union for the city of San Fernando for an endorsement, because you have to get the endorsement of the police community, right? So I'm sitting there and I take my friend Victor, my best friend from third grade. He's still my best friend to this day. He's had a like up and down story himself. So we're talking to the chief of police, to some of their POA, police officer association. And I'm asking for their endorsement, and I can tell that the cops are looking at my buddy, and he's sitting next to me, like right here, right? Like they're not even looking at me any longer. And I turned to look at my friend Victor, and he's nodding out. So if you know what that means, is that he was on something, right? So he's like literally just, I could tell, just like heads falling. And I'm like, oh. So I'm like, hey, Vic, you want to say anything? He's like, oh. And he's a real smart guy. And he said some words, and then the police sat back and said, we're not going to endorse you. One of the officers told me right to my face, he says, Richard, you know, we had a lot of problems in the past with you. There's no way that we can provide our endorsement to you. So I sat back as well, and I said, listen, I'm a school teacher today, right next door. I said, I know all our parents in this community. I know voters. I've changed my life. I want you guys to reconsider. So nonetheless, they didn't endorse me. And what ended up happening is I became the #1 vote getter in District 5, which is the area around Morningside. And I became a city council member that March at 30 years old. And I literally was now running the city that I ran around doing all kinds of chaos as a kid. Yeah. And here I was closing down a Mexican restaurant where that had become the library. And we were pushing for like a state-of-the-art library down the street that's called Library Plaza today. And those little things is literally what even drove me more, because now I was like, look at what we've been able to produce by advocating for changes in this community. And that to me was another sort of turning point that elevated my career, my persona, who I am forever. The contacts that I made through that experience were contacts and friendships that I continue to have to this day. And the police, we made up. That officer who was like, hey, you know, I know who you are. We've had a lot of run with you. He's now the chief of police. Okay. And like, he'll invite us over to the PALS golf tournaments. Why? Because they also believe in redemption. I believe all people genuinely are good people, but sometimes we're not in congruence with our ways of life at that moment, right? And I share that because that's what's possible. That is truly what is possible for any kid. Yep. I'm not a genius. I'm not, you know.
Well, you probably are, but you're an expert in your own story and your own journey and your own experiences. And that matters.
Thank you, Shane. Yeah.
That matters. So I want to ask, because this came up earlier and I didn't want to interrupt you. Do you prefer to be called Richard or Ricardo?
Yeah, Richard now, because
okay.
it's just.
I wanted to be respectful and ask, because I want to honor your wishes, not what your kindergarten teacher.
Yeah.
What her wishes were, but okay. So let me ask you this. So this is, first of all, you do need to write a book, and you do need to tell your story, and you do need to share these things, because I think your journey is, while it is unique, it's not unique to the everyday kid that is encountering, and we need to make your outcome not unique. We need to make your outcome more common, and that does that starts with the teachers. That starts with the education system where these young people are coming up in, because hey, this is the reality of it, and you're doing that. And I don't know how the chips will fall, and I don't know if I'll ever get the opportunity to come speak at your school, but one, it would be an honor, and two, I'd love to. You are one of those people that this is why I do this. This is why I do what I do, because we are the sum total of all of our relationships and who we are and how we go about things. And I live by a premise of so legacy is what I play for. Legacy is it's I could go make more money going and working somewhere, being a CEO of a company or starting another, startup business and do these different things. I've chosen to do this and come and speak and share my journey and those things. But what I will say is legacy for me is I want to impact as many people in a positive way around the world as I possibly can. And I operate off of I want everybody to love me, but I don't care if anybody loves me. Meaning, I want I want to make a connect. I want to make a connection with you so well that if something unforeseen happens to me, and 6 years from now I untimely pass, and you're like, man, I got to go out and see Shane's family. I've got to go do that. And there's a line down the street, and it's 104 degrees, and it's raining, and you're pissed because you're out there like, oh, Shane, like, of course, like you would be have us out here doing this. But at the same time, I don't change who I am based off of other people's opinion or assumption of how they go about things. And that is where that self-awareness. So I'm actually in the process of writing my first book.
Wow.
And that is, I think I've decided on a title as Your Trauma is Your Superpower. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of what we've talked about. That's why I relate and connect with you, I think, so well, because you embody that. You embody that, hey, I went through these things and I've now turned them into, you call them assets. I call them superpowers, because you
That's
learned.
That's a great title, Shane.
Well, you,
My trauma is my superpower.
yeah, yeah.
That's a seller.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that. I appreciate that. I actually want, so I hope you and I stay connected and keep a relationship, because there's part of your story I would actually like to include in that book and share, because there's certain parts of my life that I think you and I are very similar. And while you've got more hair than I do, and I've got a beard and you've got the stash, and our skin complexions might be a little different. We're probably way more alike and way more similar than the outside world would lead us to believe. And yeah. So I want to wrap this up, because I know you've got a lot going on, and you've got a school day, and you've got different things that you've got to attend to, and I certainly don't want to keep you any longer. And I do want to float an idea out there to you as well. So one of the things that I want to do with this as well is, along with sharing stories and along with that, is I want to bring other principals or headmasters in to like a group conversation, and do where we maybe have you on, and maybe a friend of mine who's a principal in Australia, and maybe a principal in England, and we come on and we talk about just different aspects of leadership and culture. And yeah, I think that would be great. So we'll wrap it up here.
Yeah.
How we wrap it up is typically I ask you two personal questions, just so people can just learn a little. You've shared an amazing amount from you, so I've got to be a little bit creative on what I ask here. And then I've been on your side of the fence, where I've been asked a lot of questions, and in that interview, I'm thinking, man, I'd really like to ask this person something. So I've had people say that to me, like, man, can I ask you some questions? So now we kind of make it a part of what this is, to where I'm actually going to turn it over before we sign off and allow you to ask me a question. So, so your two questions is one, and this is important. And this is a common one I ask a lot of educators. So in education, you sometimes, as we talked about, you have to miss your planning period. You have to miss your lunch. You've got to cover for another teacher. You got to, cram a snack in between the bell and these different things. What is your go-to snack that you keep in the office?
I'll show you.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
I have a bunch of trail mix, and
okay.
This is literally that's go-to snack when it like you just can't.
Is it any trail mix, or is it this brand?
It's any trail mix.
Any
And
trail mix. Okay.
the teachers know that this is what I like snack on. So I always get the real bags on my table here. I'm like, oh, cool. I got some more of it. This is the go-to energy snack right here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Now, so my next question is, I'm pretty, so to give you some context, one of my really, really good friends, is a friend of mine named Sergio Garcia. So, I'm sorry, Sergio Ortega. Garcia is his middle name. Sergio Ortega. And he owns, 4 or 5 different, Mexican restaurants over here where I'm at. And then a really cool story is they had so many restaurants, they got to the point where they built these large hydroponic growing facilities for tomatoes because they were obviously using so many tomatoes and it was just going to be cheaper for them to grow. Well, then the Walmart of Mexico found out and they ended up just supplying the grocery stores there and whatever. It made more money, I guess. It came out to a positive. So he and I would sit a lot of times when I was going through my divorce. I would go and eat at the restaurant. They jokingly would call me Chupacabra. I know what Chupacabra is, but that was my nickname. I'm a big guy, and I would help a lot of those guys that would buy cars and make sure they were being taken care of and not being taken advantage of, and all of those different things. So a lot of these guys became very much like family to me. I would come and sit down late at night when the restaurants were closing and eat, and we'd watch soccer, and we'd just talk. We just share stories, and they would tell me different things that they missed from a cuisine standpoint from Mexico. Now I know you've lived here, and I know you're in California, so you have access to a lot of things that are very authentic. So my question is, if I come, because everybody says tacos and these different things, what is a genuine Mexican dish from that wouldn't be something that I would go if I come to LA? If you say, "Hey Shane, this is where we've got to go and eat," what would that be?
It would be this place in on Ventura Boulevard called Sol y Luna, and it's carnes in a molcajete, and carnes is like different meats, chicken, beef.
Yep.
There's even shrimp in it, and it's in this bowl that is made out of volcanic rock, and it comes literally, I don't know how they do it, but it comes sizzling, and it's flavorful, it's mouth-watering thinking about it, and it's it's the go-to dish that my wife and I will order when we're like, say, hey, we want to go eat, like a sit-down Mexican restaurant. That's it. It's amazing. It has cheese in it. It's so well prepared. You would absolutely love it. And the sauce in it's kind of like a mole sauce. So it's to die for. Seriously.
I'm looking at it right now online.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, I looked it up. So
it's their plate. It's the most served plate that they have there, and that you can get the family one and feed 4 from out of it. And I swear you could probably eat over 2 days from that molcajete.
Oh, I see it. Yes. So yes, I've never seen anything like that. Yeah. And 2, it's definitely something that if I come out that way, you and I are definitely going to try.
You're more than welcome to come out to the city of LA, hang out. Love to have you come and talk to our kids and share your story. So like, I've been thinking, like when you said, ask you a question, and I asked this of others that I meet to have like we have similar congruent stories, is what was your turning point? Where there had to, I don't know. Yeah. I can pinpoint my turning points. Yeah. Have you pinpointed your turning point?
So I can. Yeah. And so I can, but I can't. And this is something. So I have a therapist, and I go to therapy and kind of not really to deal with the trauma. I dealt with that going up, but it's ironic that you asked me this, because this is a question that I ask myself, and I actually pondered this for a title of my book is Why Me? Why was I able to figure it out? I'll talk to a friend of mine who I've got 3 friends that I'm gonna do a podcast episode with to give teachers some insight. Each of them collectively between the 3 of them, were all sentenced over almost 40 years in prison for different things, and they're all out, right? They're all out. They're free. They're doing things to better their life, whether it's entrepreneurship and different things. And I used to feel guilty. I used to feel guilty, and because I would remain friends with these people, and it's like, why was I able to figure it out? Yes, do I have advantages because I'm white? 100%. Yes. Do I get into certain rooms because I'm white? 100%. But there has to be more to it, because I still had to make a conscious effort to say, I'm not going to go this way. I'm going to go that way. And I think a lot of it had to do with being lucky. I just, like a lot of us, there's a lot of, we do, I think everybody does some things that they're not proud of in their high school years. Just a majority of us never get caught, and for me, so I was really self-aware, so I could see my friends and them going a certain way, and it never made sense to me. I was always around things I didn't need to be around. So people, like, I was the guy who, they were like, man, look, you don't need to be a part of this. Like, you don't, you're like, we're not going to see it. So, but I've always had that ability. And I think that's why, from a speaking standpoint, it's easier for me to go into schools like yours or different schools, because I can speak from a place of authenticity, because I've got friends of mine who will call me from the penitentiary and, oh, I don't have time to do this. All you have is time. I don't like who you are doesn't change my communication to you. And my respect for you actually means that I'm going to tell you what you don't want to hear, and what you need to hear, rather than what you want to hear. And that is actually, for me, that's one of the biggest signs of respect you can give another human being. So for me, I guess I don't really know. And I've searched, I've internally searched and tried to figure that out. There was a time in my life where I remember I was tired of this narrative from my parents of, this is what you're destined to be, hearing it from, teachers, and, just being like, you know what, like, I'm not going to take the conventional route, but I'm going to figure it out. And I had kids at a young age. So I had 2 kids by the time I was 23. So I made that conscious effort to say, hey, I'm going to do everything I can so that my kids never have to deal with what I dealt with. They didn't, which is a double-edged sword, because you want them to be able to navigate life. And like you said, there's a lot of benefits to going through life, how we've went through life, and those things. So I think it's a long answer, I guess, but I guess that the biggest turn was, I have kids, so I have to make sure that my life, that I'm going to be a good dad. I'm going to take pride in, I'm not going to talk to my kids. I'm not going to, discipline my kids. I'm not going to abuse my kids. I'm not going to verbally, talk to them this way.
The past, right? You're not going to replicate the past.
Yeah, because it's such a cycle, right?
Yeah,
like you know it, because just as well as your story is a story of redemption and change, you know of many other families and many other kids who came up and were living just like you were in those environments, and now they never made it. They never made it out of high school. They repeated that same pattern. So that's why I say your story, and I mean this, Richard. I am truly inspired by your story, because you broke your cycle, right? Now, while maybe it wasn't the cycle where your family came from, it was the cycle that started when you got here, and you could have used that as an excuse. As a matter of fact, you were probably given it as an excuse by everybody around you to say, hey, it's okay if you don't succeed. Yeah. Your parents didn't either. It's okay if your mom didn't have this education, or your dad doesn't have this education. So we understand, and it's okay, but you proceeded through life anyway. And I am massively, massively, massively intrigued by people who have that inside, who are, and you can't really quantify it, right? Mm-hmm. You can't really quantify it. There's just a level of, screw you, you've pissed me off enough, and I'm going to show you.
Yeah.
And I love it. I love it. So I can't give you an answer because I don't actually know the moment. But you are causing me to reflect. So if I do find it, I will share.
All right. Well, let's stay in touch, Shane, for sure. Okay.
Yes, Richard, I appreciate you. I appreciate what you do, and there's no doubt the young people that you come in contact with and the educators that you're now serving as a leader. You're massively appreciated, my man, and I hope a friendship comes out of this, no doubt. And you have a blessed day, a blessed weekend. I see the sun shining there in beautiful sunny California. So enjoy the rest of your day, and let's be in touch.
Okay. Thanks, Shane. Have a good one.
Thank you, sir. Cheers.
Bye.